Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing I want to say is that the title of the legislation is Never Forget the Heroes, Permanent Authorization of the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. And I am delighted to be a strong supporter of the legislation, a co-sponsor of the legislation, and I am especially delighted after hearing the incredibly powerful and poignant testimony of our witnesses today that the word permanent is in there, because the people in this room today made a permanent, lifelong commitment to the community of America when they went to rescue, to help, to assist. And we need to make a permanent, lifelong commitment to the people in this room. Not 5 years, not 10 years, but for as long as we have them with us, we must be committed to them. Something that Mr. Stewart said reminded me of this essay that I once read by George Orwell, who contrasted patriotism and nationalism. And he said, patriotism is about a true devotion to your community, to your neighbors, to your friends, to your family, to the values, to your Constitution, to the community. That's what patriotism is. Nationalism is just about sinking your individuality into some mythic military hold to go to war against people from other countries. And the people in the room today are real patriots. And we've got to be patriots too, Mr. Chairman. We've got to pass this legislation to demonstrate that we really do take care of our own people, and we are really devoted to the community that is America. Maybe they were victims of misfortune the day that those 18 hijackers, most of them Saudis, pumped up with religious hatred and extremism and zealotry, came to attack our country. So maybe they were victims of misfortune, but if today they're not getting the health care that they need, they are not just victims of misfortune, they are victims of an injustice perpetrated by our government. And life is hard enough on our people with all of the misfortune, with the sickness, the illness, the injury, the accident, that the government should not be compounding the misfortunes of life with the injustice of denying people the health care that they need and that they should be receiving in the richest society that ever existed at the richest moment that it was ever in existence. So we're going to make this happen. Ms. Nordstrom, I want to ask you a question. Your story is very poignant to me. You're describing what happened to school children who were sent back to the neighborhood when it was no longer safe. And now you describe how many of your classmates are coming down with asthma and cancer and fatal diseases, and you've already lost some of them, and I think you described being at your 20th reunion, is that right? Or
not even my 20th reunion,
not even.
That's in a few years.
Okay, but how does America, or how does the city keep track of people in your situation? Who reached out to you? I assume that the fire departments and the police departments have a way of communicating with people, but who's keeping track of people in your situation?
That's been incredibly challenging, and one of the reasons that this fund closing, when it does, will really be harmful for us is that a lot of people in my situation are not aware that they qualify for these services. A lot of the coverage of these services gets directed at responders, and because of that, a lot of survivors, especially those outside of the city, and we live nationally dispersed. I live in California. I do not live in New York City. I haven't for 12 years. A lot of us don't have local advocates on this issue. There's no local press coverage of this issue. And so there's a large group of people that may already be sick who just aren't aware that these services are available to them, who aren't familiar with how to apply to them. We have really had to rely on word of mouth pretty extensively. And considering that a lot of the students who were present in Lower Manhattan during the cleanup were not actually residents of the neighborhood, Stuyvesant has 3,000 students, and most of them do not live in Lower Manhattan. There is a similarly large high school who also doesn't serve a resident population a couple blocks away. There are a lot of specialized schools in that area. A lot of them do, because a lot of people's parents didn't live in the area, they weren't even informed about these risks. They weren't informed about these services, and so we're still doing the work of reaching out to them now.
One final question. This is not a problem that affects only the people in New York. There are people who've left New York or other parts of the country, but also we weren't just hit in New York. We were hit down here in our area at the Pentagon. We were hit in Pennsylvania. But Mr. Stewart, let me come to you, since I know you've been such a zealous advocate for the people in the room. How do we get all of America to understand this is a national problem? This doesn't affect just one isolated community geographically.
I'm pretty sure all of America does understand that. I think our problem has been with the part of America that represents America. Our problem has been with the Congress and not with the American people. It's not like the support for this community isn't out there. Our problem has been that there are oftentimes just a lot of excuses. Look, it takes an incredible amount of effort from these men and women to come down here. I've been at this for 10 years with them. John Field's been at it for, 14. And they're down here hundreds of times, spending thousands of hours. It's not hard to convince the American people that this is a no-brainer and a worthy cause. Our problem has been in these chambers, and I'm sorry that it's not meant as an attack on the grand institution of democracy. It's meant as a dumbfounded shrug of, I can't understand why this has been so hard and why every time we take one step forward, something gets withheld. We've been to too many funerals, man, too many hospitals, too many hospices, and it's gonna keep going. And I think we're just at the end of the rope.
Thank you for your advocacy, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, and I excuse myself only to go to the floor of the House to introduce legislation. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Okay. Before I begin, I want to say thank you to all of the witnesses. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your stories.